Can poverty be contagious? That was the question I never expected to hear, especially from someone who shares my bloodline. The words came just as I pulled out my chair to sit down. Calm, gentle, but sharp as a razor's edge. Sit a bit farther away, so poverty does not spread. The whole table burst out laughing. Glasses clinked like bells ringing in a holiday, even though there was nothing to celebrate. I looked around. The chandelier light bounced off deep red wine glasses, reflecting the glowing eyes around me. Everyone was talking about their latest successes, new houses, new job titles, the American dream, thriving in the heart of Boston. Except for me, I did not know where to place my hands. I did not know who to nod to. I was used to silence, but I was not used to becoming the punchline, especially at a gathering labeled as a family party. I lowered my head to avoid their eyes, and caught a glimpse of my aunt at the end of the table looking at me. No judgment, no comfort, just strange. An old dull ache began to stir, like something in that room had been broken for a long time and only now was starting to leak. I still remember clearly the smell of watery soy sauce that day. A strange mix of sour and salty, the kind that feels like it could seep into your skin if you stood too close to the stove for too long. It was my cousin's birthday. The whole family threw a big party, the table covered with a white cloth-scented candles and birthday cake with tall glassware I used to think only existed in TV restaurants. The adults were busy chatting and laughing, the kids were scrambling for seats near the fried chicken platter, and I stood tucked against the wooden door with chipped paint, my hands still dusty from helping my mother clean the yard. No one invited me to the table. No one asked if I had eaten. I was about to step forward just one step when my second uncle's stare stopped me cold from across the table. A kid who cannot even study properly should eat somewhere else. Do not squeeze in here. Then my sixth aunt chimed in with a laugh. A boy in worn-out clothes wants to sit with our special guests. Laughter spread like wildfire on dry straw. No one noticed me lowering my head. No one saw my hand still gripping the frayed edge of my shirt sleeve. I turned away, careful not to let my footsteps echo too loudly on the old tile floor. By the window, I looked back at the golden light pouring down on a table full of food, at the joyous laughter and clinking glasses, and the seats that were always just enough for the deserving. I was not hungry. I was just cold, the kind of cold that seeps in from within and threads itself through every breath. For one brief second, my mother saw me. She paused, then turned away, pouring more tea for the guests. I did not blame her. She was just doing what she thought was best, in the way adults often do. But in that moment, I understood. In my family's eyes, I was not clean enough to sit at the table, not good enough to be a source of pride, not important enough for anyone to save a seat for me, not even an old plastic chair at the edge. I used to believe that if I behaved better, looked tidier, they would see me differently. I combed my hair straight, folded my clothes, neatly arrived on time to every party. But the adults' eyes still slid past me like I was not even there. No harsh words, just silence, indifference. And that was what hurt the most, not the rejection, but being ignored. I became a shadow in my own home. No one calls a shadow by name. No one remembers to save it a seat. At every gathering, I was always at the kids' table by the window, just enough light to see how separated I was, but never close enough to hear the laughter clearly. Once I proudly showed off a score of 9 out of 10 in math, full of hope. But my third uncle simply said, not bad. But my kid's already in the advanced student competition. A 9 is just average now. Everyone went on talking. No one asked anything more. I stood in the middle of the living room, gripping the crumpled paper, forcing a smile. From that moment on, I stopped showing off anything. Because I realized even if I had something worth being proud of, I still was not valuable enough to be heard. In all the family photos hanging on the wall, I was usually hidden behind someone's shoulder or pushed off to the edge of the frame. One time I asked my mother, "Why is there no picture of me on the wall?" She looked at me, hesitated a few seconds, then said, "You do not have anything to be proud of yet, sweetheart. Wait until you pass something big." I remember clearly that was my 8th birthday. And I remember just as clearly, that night I took down my own photo frame and hid it under the bed. Not out of anger, but out of shame. That was when I started learning how to disappear. I arrived late to every meal so I would not have to pick a seat. I washed my own clothes so I would not hear my mother sigh. I cleared the table quickly after every party just to avoid the judgmental stares from relatives. "This one still hasn't improved, huh?" I once wrote in my notebook. "If I stay silent long enough, will they forget I ever existed?" The writing was shaky, the ink smudged from my wet hands. I hid that notebook under my pillow as if covering up a crime that only I knew about. That is how I grew up, like a shadow, leaving no trace, making no noise, bothering no one. And the more I lived that way, the more I believed I was the poor shadow that nobody wanted to see. I turned 18 without anyone giving me advice. No coming-of-age talk like in the movies. No one asking what I wanted to study, what I liked, or what I dreamed of doing. I only knew one thing: I had to leave home as soon as possible. Not because I hated anyone, but because I simply could not breathe under that roof where every breath I took felt like a bother to someone else. I applied to a public university not because I loved the major, but because the tuition was affordable. I got in. No one called to congratulate me. There was no little family dinner like the one they had for my cousin 2 years earlier. I arrived in the city with nothing but an old suitcase, a few sets of clothes, and 1 million Vietnamese dong, roughly $40, which my mother slipped into my hand without looking me in the eye. I went to school in the morning, worked in the afternoon, mixing cement at construction sites, handing out flyers, waiting tables, working overnight shifts at gas stations, and watching over motorbikes in hospital parking lots. There were nights when the rain soaked through my collar, my hands were numb from the cold, and my feet were wrinkled from standing in puddles, but still, I felt truly alive. No one knew who I was, no one remembered my name, and strangely, that felt more freeing than anything I ever felt at home. I studied hard, like just one more point on a test could break me out of the poor and useless fate my family had assigned to me since childhood. I earned a scholarship. I started freelancing. I saved up and invested in a small startup. I taught myself marketing and business management, reading page after page of old books I borrowed from the library. I could not afford to get sick. I could not afford to stumble. I knew that if I slowed down for even a moment, no one would wait for me, and no one would help me back up. Once I came back to visit home, bringing small gifts, a watch I bought with my part-time job money for my father, and a new coat for my mother. My father looked at the watch and said, "Is this from the market?" My mother held the coat and smiled faintly. "You should save your money for food, sweetheart." I was not hurt by what they said. I was just tired. Tired of having to prove my worth to people who never really cared to see it. Tired because every step forward I took felt like walking on sand, leaving a mark that got washed away by the next wave. No matter what I did, no matter how much I earned. In their eyes, I was still the boy who stood quietly by the door. I used to believe that one day they would change, that they would call my name with pride. But eventually, I understood. Some doors are not closed. They were never meant for me to walk through. There were nights when I lay in my tiny attic room, listening to the rickety fan, staring at the gray ceiling and wondering, was I wrong to keep trying so hard for people who never once looked back? I once believed that if I worked long enough, pushed hard enough, succeeded big enough, someone in the family would finally pat my shoulder and say, "You did great." But year after year, reunion after memorial, I remained just a passing shadow in conversations filled with job titles, salaries, new houses, and kids enrolled in international schools. Maybe what hurt most was not being underestimated. It was being forgotten. I was once a child who only wanted to sit at the same table. I grew up to be a man who only wanted to be called by his name with respect. But the world I grew up in had no place for that kind of tenderness. They taught me silence. They taught me to stand on my own. And I learned fast. I do not resent them. Because if I had not walked through those cold, indifferent stares, I would have never learned how to live alone. Never known how to stand tall without applause. Never known how strong I could be. Until today, when I sat back at the same table, the one where laughter was once pointed at me, I realized I had changed. I no longer needed to fight for a seat, because I had found a chair of my own, even if no one in this family had ever offered it to me. I came back on a mild, sunny day. It was not a holiday, nor any special occasion. Just a simple family gathering, the kind of tradition I used to believe I no longer belonged to. The last time I came home, if I remember correctly, was 3 years ago. Back then, I had just started my third job of the year, renting an 18 square meter room, about 194 square feet, with a window that faced the town dump. I returned because my grandmother was ill. But by the time I walked through the door, she was already asleep. And the next morning when I woke up, her bed was empty. I never got to say anything to her, and since then, I promised myself the next time I return, it will not be just because I am summoned. I will come back when I am ready. Today, I was ready. I chose to wear a white linen shirt, no brand name, but clean and neatly pressed. I did not bring a suitcase. I did not drive. I did not book a private car. I took the earliest coach bus, sat in the back row, and passed through golden rice fields that I once dreamed of leaving behind. And now I was coming back not to be welcomed, but simply to be present quietly. The old wooden house was still the same. The green paint on the metal gate had faded, and the apricot trees in the yard had lost their leaves after the Lunar New Year. I walked in, and no one noticed. Everyone was busy talking about land prices, bank interest rates, and plans to buy more property for their kids who were studying in Saigon. I chose a seat at the end of the table where streaks of sunlight filtered through the tent roof, casting dull patterns across the plastic surface. No one asked where I had come from. No one stood to offer me a seat or pour me a drink. Only one pair of eyes glanced my way, the aunt who once scooped rice into my bowl when I was 10 years old. She gave a slight nod. I nodded back, no smile, no words. That was enough. I lost count of how many stories had passed around the table. All I knew was that my name never came up in any of them. People talked about new contracts, about the boarding school acceptance of my eldest cousin's daughter, about the factory project that my third uncle was managing. Someone opened their phone and proudly showed off photos of their new villa, so proud that they did not even need another sip of wine. I sat still, my hands resting loosely in my lap eyes, looking out to the garden where my grandmother's old hammock had long decayed, leaving only the frame swaying gently among the dry apricot branches. No one asked about my work. No one wondered how I had been living these past 3 years. Maybe they simply could not remember. Until my cousin's voice rang out that sweet, high-pitched tone she always used at family events to keep things friendly. "Hey, how is little T doing these days? Still doing those random freelance gigs?" A few heads turned. Their eyes were not malicious, but they carried a quiet disinterest that said everything. I looked up straight into her eyes and smiled. Still the same. Just enough to get by. "Yeah, well, as long as you are healthy," she replied awkwardly, then turned to the person next to her. "Everyone's busy with stable jobs now. Who has time for side hustles anymore?" Everyone chuckled lightly. Maybe they thought I did not hear clearly. Or worse, that I did hear but would not have the courage to react. I just smiled. A faint enough smile that no one could call it confrontational, but clear enough to show them. I was no longer the shadow they used to look down on. Even so, something inside me stirred something strange. Not anger, but doubt. I looked around. Those same faces, people who grew up with me, who once shared meals, who once called each other brother and sister, now looked like actors in a play that had gone on for too long. The lines were all the same. The questions still revolved around, how much do you make? What is your title? Did you buy a car yet? The only one who had changed was me. And maybe that is why I no longer fit in. I began to wonder if I had arrived here today in a luxury car, wearing a sleek tailored suit. Would their eyes have looked at me any differently? Or would I still be the poor cousin from back then, no matter how expensive the shoes I walked in? A breeze swept through, gently rustling the fabric above. Sunlight angled into my eyes, sharp and stinging. I did not know exactly what made me do it. Maybe it was the brief glance from my younger cousin, a quick look, but enough to see that he silently agreed with my older cousin's sarcastic jab. Maybe it was the sigh from my third aunt, who had been silently watching me, as if wanting to speak but unable to. Or maybe it was just that I had been silent for far too long. I leaned down, opened the simple black bag under my chair, and pulled out a thick file wrapped neatly in a brown folder. I said nothing. I just placed it gently on the table right between the teacups, the sunflower seed plate, and half-filled glasses of wine. No one noticed at first. They were still laughing, still halfway through a conversation about their upcoming European vacation and how airfare had gone up due to fluctuations in the euro. Until my fourth uncle, always the curious and cautious one, reached for the file and slowly opened it. And then, silence. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the tent. The birds in the garden were still chirping. The old hammock still creaked in the breeze. But around the table, everything froze. My uncle looked up at me, his eyes caught between surprise, confusion, and disbelief. "Is this really yours?" I nodded. Not a single word more. My cousin, who had been laughing earlier, stopped mid-breath. She leaned closer to peek at the document in his hands. Then she turned to me, eyes narrowing. "Wait, this land is..." Where exactly? I kept my face calm, my voice steady. "Downtown project. Our company is acquiring the third adjacent lot. The legal ownership is under my name. The company is called T-Bar Holdings." A soft "oh" slipped out from someone, not quite admiration, not quite awkwardness. Another scratched his head and forced a chuckle to break the tension. "So, you're in real estate. I thought you were just doing random freelance stuff." I did not respond. No bitterness, no smugness. I just looked around the table, face by face, eye by eye, at those who once believed I was drifting through life without purpose. And then I said something, quietly, but it landed like a pin dropped into a still room. Poverty is not about money. It is about how we choose to see others. Silence. Not even a spoon tapped a glass. Not even a nervous cough. Just the wind stronger now, lifting the sunshade and sending a few white napkins fluttering to the floor. I watched one drift past my feet, and suddenly I felt something unfamiliar. Not pride, not triumph, just relief. Like I had finally pulled a boulder off my chest, one I had carried since childhood. I never imagined a sentence so simple could reach so deeply into someone's soul. As soon as I finished speaking, the entire table fell silent. No one raised their glass. No one touched the food. And for the first time, their eyes did not look at me like I was an outsider. They looked at me like they were trying to remember who I really was. And in that moment, I saw my third aunt slowly set down her glass, her hands trembling. She did not look at me. She did not look at anyone. She just lowered her head as if trying to swallow something stuck in her throat. I didn't know. You still remembered. Her voice was raspy, cracked like glass worn thin by time. I turned to her, and for the first time in years, I saw her eyes red with tears. That day, the day they didn't let you into Hung's birthday party, do you remember I did not speak? I did not need to. Because that memory had been branded into me for over 20 years. That night I came home. I saw you standing at the door. You didn't cry. You didn't say a word. You just stood there, staring at the table already cleared. I didn't know what to do. I only knew. I grabbed the last pack of cookies and quietly slipped it into your pocket. And from that day on, I started sending money. I looked up, eyes wide. She smiled, a fragile, trembling smile, full of helplessness I didn't dare tell anyone. I was afraid they'd say I was spoiling you. I used my savings, sold a few gold bracelets, sent the money through a friend in the city, asked them to pay your tuition. The whole family thought you got a full scholarship. But it was me. I paid. I went silent. A chill ran down my spine. All this time I believed I had done it alone. I thought no one had ever reached out to help me. And now that belief shattered. I felt like I was 10 years old again, standing outside the doorway, staring at the table. But this time, a quiet hand had slipped a small cookie into my pocket, silently, unconditionally asking for nothing in return. She cried, not out of sorrow, but because carrying a secret for so long can be its own kind of burden. Everyone looked at her, then at me. No one could say a word. There were no apologies, no explanations to undo the years I had been dismissed. Only silence. Heavy, dense silence. As if even the air had lowered its head. I turned away. I did not want anyone to see my eyes. Because I did not want them to mistake it, those were not tears of weakness. They were the tears of someone who had just discovered he had not been as alone as he always believed. And in that very moment, as the last rays of sunlight fell across the table, as the file still lay open between the dessert plate and the empty glass of wine, I knew they would never dare look at me the same way again. Not because of money, but because I had dared to step out of the shadow. And this time, I was not standing alone. I do not know exactly when everything began to shift. Maybe it was after I spoke, or maybe it was when my aunt cried. The air around the table cooled like someone had turned down the temperature. The chatter about real estate, stock markets, and end-of-year vacations disappeared as if none of it had ever been said. No one told them to be quiet, but somehow everyone fell into the same thoughtful silence. I looked around, those same faces, the same people who once laughed as I was held up as an example of failure. They no longer looked at me like some casually dressed cousin with an unclear career. They looked at me like they were trying to remember everything they had missed. I was still sitting in the same plastic chair at the end of the table, the one no one noticed when I arrived. But now, every pair of eyes, even if not looking directly at me, was turned in my direction. My third aunt gently wiped her tears and turned away. She said nothing more. I felt a deep gratitude toward her, so much so that I could not bring myself to look at her for long, because if I did, I would not be able to hold back my emotions. I looked down, and for the second time that afternoon, opened the bag at my feet. This time, it was not the thick file I placed on the table, but a thinner one, just a few papers tucked into a black folder. I set it down and slid it toward the center of the table where the fruit platter had been. No one asked what I was doing. No one interrupted. Only the wind moved, making the plastic curtain behind me flutter softly against the metal roof. I opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet a pink land ownership certificate, brand new. My fourth uncle recognized it first. His eyes narrowed. "Is that a land title?" I nodded gently, sliding it toward him. "This lot right in the city center near the government complex. Our company just bought the neighboring parcel and is applying for a commercial development permit." A few people leaned in. There was quiet murmuring. Chairs shifted slightly. My cousin from earlier looked clearly flustered. She glanced at the document, then back at me. Her voice softer now, far from the playful tone she used before. "So your company, the name is yours?" I neither nodded nor shook my head. I just said calmly, "The company name is mine, but I am not standing alone." A simple sentence, yet enough to make every gaze pause. Not because I was rich, not because of the land or the contracts, but because they realized I was not the same. I did not brag. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or explain myself. I just existed in all the ways they once thought I never could. And that presence ironically made them lower their heads. No one said anything for a whole minute. But a minute of silence at a table full of people feels like the stillness right before a theater curtain falls. My fourth uncle placed the certificate down, his fingers still resting on the edge of the folder, as if unsure of what he had just touched. I saw the certainty fade from his eyes, the kind of certainty that once came from being a seasoned construction contractor, now replaced by hesitation when faced with someone they had long looked down on, who had quietly moved far beyond them. My youngest uncle, usually the most talkative, now kept his head down, quietly pouring tea. My cousin, the one who had mocked me earlier, was now fidgeting with the corner of a wrinkled tissue. No one looked me in the eye anymore. It felt like they were standing in front of a mirror that had suddenly revealed their own pretenses reflected back at them. I had no intention of showing off. I did not mean to retaliate. But when I placed that document on the table, I never expected it to carry that much weight. Not because of the numbers written on it, but because they had never believed I was capable of putting anything on the table. For so many years, I was used to being sidelined. I learned to sit the farthest, say the least, and turn myself invisible. I once thought if I stayed silent long enough, they would forget I existed, and maybe that would be a good thing. But it turns out staying silent for too long makes people believe they have the right to speak for you, to judge you, to laugh at you. And today, with one simple gesture, placing a single piece of paper on the table, I took it all back. Not respect, but that sudden pause in their eyes. My third aunt still sat quietly at the edge of the table, saying nothing. Her gaze was different. She did not look confused or envious or curious. She just looked as if she had known this all along. I suddenly remembered the first time I signed the legal documents to establish my own company. It was a cold winter afternoon, raining like needles. I was sitting in an empty office with no furniture, using a cardboard box as a desk to hold the papers. No one congratulated me. No one shook my hand. Just a cup of cold coffee and the wind howling through the glass window. And yet today, at a family gathering among those who used to laugh at me, I was sitting here saying nothing while one by one they had to reevaluate everything they thought they knew. The child who was once not invited to the table, now placing a contract on that very table, one they could never have imagined. And the most bitter part, do you know what it is? It is not that they once rejected me. It is that I once believed they were right. Well, you were just always so quiet. My cousin's voice broke the silence, soft, but enough to shatter the stillness. We didn't mean anything by it, really. It's just, no one expected this, you know. It's been so long since we heard anything from you. I turned to look at her. She was still smiling, but the confidence she once had was gone. Her smile was crooked, trembling, like someone trying to cover a hole they suddenly realized was too deep. I said nothing, just gave a small nod, because I did not need them to admit they were wrong. I just wanted to be looked in the eye, as a person. Another cousin quickly jumped in. Honestly, you're just talented. Everyone's surprised, that's all. When we were younger, none of us imagined this. But hey, that's inspiring, right? He laughed a forced friendly laugh as if he had always been on my side. But I remembered clearly it was the same cousin who once said, when I was 12 years old, "You're so dumb you'll probably end up picking trash for a living." I remembered everything. I never struck back, but I never forgot. Something inside me felt heavy. Not from anger. There was no longer a reason to be angry. Just a deep growing distance between me and this table, where everyone now seemed to be scrambling to piece together a new narrative, trying to pull me back into being just another normal part of the family. But I was not that person anymore. I had lived long enough to understand when you're no longer a shadow, people will try to find reasons to make your light seem like a fluke. Someone else spoke up this time. It was my fourth uncle. "So how long have you had this company? Why didn't you say something earlier so the family could celebrate?" I looked at him, my eyes calm, because back then, whenever I said anything, no one listened. He froze. His mouth opened slightly as if to respond, but he said nothing. I saw my mother sitting at the other table quietly lower her head. She had not spoken a word all afternoon. She was the one who used to tell me not to dream about being some big shot, that just being stable was good enough. I did not blame her. I only wished she had believed in me once. Silence returned again, this time deeper, heavier. Like a mirror cracked, not shattered, but no longer able to reflect a whole truth. I stood up slowly, placing the documents back into my bag. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. Not because they did not want to, but because they did not know what else to say. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel like I had won. I just felt tired. Tired because to reach this moment, I had walked a long road, and not one of them had ever stopped to ask me, "Are you tired?" I stood up and the plastic chair let out a soft creak. No one picked up their chopsticks. No one laughed anymore. I looked around one last time, not to say goodbye, but to remember this was the first time I left a family gathering without feeling like an outsider. I did not rush. I walked slowly along the edge of the table where the late afternoon sun stretched long across the tiled floor. Some avoided eye contact. Some gave me a small nod, silent apologies. Some held the same frozen expression as if trying to convince themselves this is not that big of a deal. But my third aunt's gaze was different. As I passed by, she gently touched my sleeve, just the faintest touch, like she was afraid to disturb something sacred that had just begun to form. "Are you heading out now?" I nodded. I could not speak. My throat was tight. "Can I walk with you for a bit? There's something I want to talk about." I turned to her, and for the first time in years, I saw her eyes. Soft, like my mother's, but dry. Only tired, as if she had been holding something in for far too long. We stepped out of the tent and walked toward the back garden. It used to be a vegetable patch. Now it was overgrown with weeds, vines tangled everywhere. Each step on the soft ground seemed to stir up a memory I thought I had buried. She walked beside me, saying nothing at first, just silence and a few glances from the corner of her eye. I knew she was about to say something important, something big. "You know," she began, her voice like wind brushing through dry leaves. "There are some things that, if left unsaid, become a burden for one person. But once spoken, the whole family will have to see themselves differently." I stopped walking. The weeds reached my knees. The wind kicked up tiny dust clouds around our feet. "Do you remember the year you got into university and no one called to congratulate you?" I nodded. No need to recall that memory had never left. she turned to me. This time she did not look away. Her gaze locked onto mine, slow and steady. You thought you did it all alone, didn't you? Thought your tuition came from a scholarship. Thought your dorm fees came from your own savings. The truth is, someone was behind you. Someone who never asked for credit, never put their name on anything. My heart skipped a beat. I opened my mouth to ask, but she gently shook her head. Wait, don't ask yet. Because if you knew everything right now, you might never look at this family the same way again. I stood still. In front of me, the sunlight had turned golden, stretching across the once abandoned backyard. The wind kept blowing, but something inside me had stopped moving. Not anger, not shock, but a deep, unmistakable sense that the truth was about to rise. And it was not small. We sat down on the concrete steps behind the house. My third aunt folded her hands together, rubbing them gently. I did not rush her, because I knew some truths take time to come out the right way. Do you remember the day the whole family told you not to sit at the table? I gave a slight nod. That was the first time I realized something was deeply wrong in this family. I turned to look at her. Her eyes were the same as always, calm, steady. But the look in them was no longer just someone telling a story. She was staring directly into her own memory. That night after you were sent down to the kitchen, I secretly brought you a piece of cake. You said nothing, just bowed your head, hands shaking. I went home and could not shake the feeling that something was not right. And the next morning, I started doing something I have never told anyone about. Until now. She paused. I could hear her sigh, long and quiet, like an old breeze returning. I opened a bank account under a friend's name. Every month I put in a little money. At first, just a few 100,000 Vietnamese dong, about $10 or $20. Later, when you went to university, I sold some of my jewelry to send more. I sat there, speechless. What did you think back then? Suddenly getting a notice that your tuition had already been paid. Suddenly seeing a few million appear in your account, which is about $100. Right when rent was due, I had thought it was a prize. I had thought I was just lucky. I had never, not once, imagined that someone had been quietly watching over every step I took. I never dared to tell anyone, because the moment they found out you were getting help, they would say you did not deserve it. And worse, they would find a way to snuff out whatever little hope you had. I listened to every word, but it felt like I was being pulled out of a dream I had lived in too long. I looked at my aunt, the small, thin woman who had always been the quietest in the family, and I could not believe it all these years. She had been the only one truly on my side. I know you thought you were alone, and for the most part, you were, but not always. There were moments when you were about to collapse, about to give up, and then suddenly an email confirmed your tuition had been paid, or an anonymous message let you know your scholarship application had been accepted. She paused, clutching her hands tightly in her lap. That was me. All of it was me. I said nothing. I did not know what to say. All the memories came rushing back, not as clear pictures, but as feelings that had once brushed across my heart and disappeared. Like all the times I asked myself, how am I still standing? Like the moments I thought I was invisible, yet somehow felt a quiet push from behind. And now, I understood. It was never that I had no one. It was that someone had chosen the most silent form of love. I sat still. My back stiffened slightly as a cold breeze blew across from behind. But the chill I felt did not come from the weather. It came from realizing I had lived inside a story I did not write. Do you remember when you were suddenly moved into the top class in 10th grade? She asked, not looking at me. I nodded. Of course I remembered. I had always thought it was just luck. Maybe the teachers felt bad for me and gave me a shot. but no one ever explained it back then. I went to talk to your homeroom teacher. Her voice was steady, with not even a hint of pride. I brought your records and a handwritten letter, several pages long. I wrote about you, a student with no one behind him, who never missed a single class even when sick, even when scolded, even when he had to work part-time after school. I turned to look at her. I did not ask for special treatment. I only asked for a different perspective. And they agreed. I remember exactly how I felt when they called my name to move to a new seat. The whole class stared. I heard whispers. I did not understand what was going on. Now I did. Someone had walked ahead of me, clearing the path, yet never stepping into the light. She asked again her questions, reaching back into the corners of my childhood. Do you remember the time you lost your tutoring money, and to this day, you think you just dropped it somewhere? I nodded. My throat tightened. That time, I cried. Alone. Because I knew if I told anyone, I would be scolded for being careless. And then, a few days later, the money magically reappeared in my bag along with a tiny note, "Be more careful." I used to think it was some kind of miracle, or maybe a prank. Now I did not even dare ask, because I already knew the answer. She continued, "The day you went to the city to start university, the relative who was supposed to pick you up canceled last minute. The whole family thought you found your own way. But the truth is, I was already there. I stood at the back of the bus station. I saw you walk out your back soaked with sweat, arms wrapped around that ripped suitcase. I did not step in. I just followed from a distance. I saw you check into the dorm. I saw you ask for directions and carry your suitcase up 3 flights of stairs. I stood in the sun for almost an hour, never calling your name, just to make sure you did not fall. I clenched my teeth. My eyes burned, not because I had been abandoned, but because for the first time I realized I had never truly been alone. She gently smoothed the fabric on her lap. Her voice grew softer, lower. There were so many times I wanted to run up, hug you tight, and tell you you are not alone. But I could not, because if I showed up, they would say you were a burden. They would say he only survived because people felt sorry for him. I closed my eyes, just for a moment. But in that moment, my whole youth flipped upside down. I had always asked, why did no one care? Now I understood the one who did care, stayed silent to protect me from another kind of pity. She smiled faintly, a smile so sad it almost hurt to see. I never had children, so I loved you like something life owed me. And if I could go back, I would stay silent again. I did not know when I started crying. All I knew was something inside me had melted, something heavy, something long carrying, like the tired, poor shadow I had worn for years, had finally slipped off. She looked at me, her eyes sunken but gentle. Are you still angry at your mother? I flinched a little. The question came from a part of my memory I was not ready to reopen. I did not answer right away, because honestly, I did not know. Angry? Yes. I used to be so angry I could not bring myself to call her. I used to sit in my tiny rented room staring at the phone screen that said, "Mom is calling," and press decline. Not because I hated her, but because every time I heard her voice I remembered the way she folded my report card quietly without saying a word. The way she lowered her head whenever relatives criticized me and never once spoke up. Your mother. She paused. She's not as heartless as you think. It is just, some wounds teach people that silence is the only way to survive. I turned to her, trying to understand everything her eyes were saying. She continued. When you were born, the family was going through a very hard time. Your mother had to drop out of school to work. And when she married your father, a controlling man, her side of the family rejected her. She was pushed to the bottom of the family. She had to bow to everyone. She had to endure everything. When she had you, she promised herself she would protect you no matter what. But her voice cracked. She was not strong enough. The older you got, the more they looked down on you, the more she got blamed. So she chose to endure it all. She chose silence, hoping that time would make you change. She thought, if I do not defend him, maybe he will work harder. If I do not comfort him, maybe he will grow up faster. But she was wrong. I did not move. My eyes were fixed on her worn-out sandals resting next to mine. I remembered everything hiding in the bathroom after relatives insulted me, those dinners where Mom quietly passed a few pieces of fish and said nothing when I did not touch my food. I used to think she was ashamed of me. But now, a part of me started to wonder if the truth was the opposite. She knew I was helping you, my aunt said, but she never stopped me. She only said one thing: if he survives, it means the heavens have mercy. I looked at her, and I knew her heart hurt more than anyone's. A strong gust of wind swept through. The metal roof above creaked loudly. She pulled her scarf tighter over her shoulders. Do not be angry with your mother anymore. Some mothers love in ways no one understands, and sometimes they do not even know how to show it. I stayed quiet, but something inside me had shifted. Not forgiveness, but softness. I used to think I had to succeed to prove to my mother that she was wrong. But now I began to wonder if, all along, she had believed in me, but simply did not have the strength to say it out loud. Then maybe everything I had worked for was actually my answer to her silent hope. I suddenly wanted to walk back to that table just to look at my mother one more time. Not for an apology, just to look a little closer at the woman I had labeled cold for so long. Maybe she was never cold. Maybe she was just too afraid of losing me that she dared not come near. I heard something break softly inside me. It was not pain, not quite forgiveness either, just a falling. Like a tiny pin dropping on a glass tabletop, sending out a ripple of sound, faint but impossible to ignore. I placed my hand over my mother's. For the first time in over 20 years, I made the first move. She flinched slightly, then gently squeezed back. We sat like that, two people who once thought they could never connect, now quietly, linked by a wordless touch. Behind us, my third aunt stood under the awning watching. She did not come closer. She simply nodded a slow, steady nod, as if she had waited for this moment a long time. I turned back to look at my mother. She had turned away, wiping her eyes with the edge of her old blouse. I did not need any more explanations, because I understood now sometimes love does not come in obvious gestures. It comes like the shade of a tree, not strong enough to stop the rain, not wide enough to block the wind, but still quietly there, giving you a place to lean on when you are too tired to stand. And I, the one who thought he had to walk alone, had always had someone walking behind, not pushing, not pulling, just following. Nothing changed all at once. There was no magical light beaming down as my mother held my hand. No background music to elevate the moment. Just a long silence, but for the first time, it did not feel cold. I used to think forgiveness required a clear apology, a visible sign of regret. But sometimes certain cracks do not need to be sealed, they just need to be acknowledged. My mother pulled her hand back and whispered almost to herself, "Your aunt, she is amazing. I owe her a lot, and I owe you even more." I shook my head gently, not to deny it, not as forgiveness, just because I did not want this conversation to end with a hollow admission of guilt. She did not need to say everything. I only needed her to be here, to have the courage to face me, to admit, even silently, that she never quite knew how to love me the right way. I glanced toward the canopy where a few relatives had started to clean up. No one looked our way, but I knew something had shifted. Not just because of the contract I placed on the table, not just because of my aunt's tears, but because, for the first time in my life, I was no longer the one being dismissed at that table. My aunt stepped closer, standing beside my mother. She said nothing. She did not need to. 3 people, each carrying a different kind of wound, now stood together in the same patch of sunlight, no longer arguing about who was right or wrong. And suddenly I felt something lift, so light. I could hardly believe it. I picked up a glass of water, not to drink, just to swirl it gently in my hands, an old habit when I am deep in thought. Then suddenly an image flashed in my mind, the wallet. Back in my first year of university, I once lost my wallet. It had all my ID and 3 million dong inside, about $120 money I had saved up for an entire month. I remember the panic tearing through my backpack in front of the dorm, asking the guards, posting online, begging for help. A week later, the wallet was returned to the admin office. Everything inside was intact. I used to think it was luck or maybe some rare kind stranger. But tonight, I started to doubt. I turned to my aunt. That wallet back then, was that you? She looked at me for a long time, then shook her head. No, that was not me. I froze. Not you. She did not say anything more. She turned to my mother, and it was my mother, who almost never talked about the past, who gave a soft nod. It was your father. I thought I had misheard. My father, the gruff man who once threw my report card on the table just to say, "This is what you're proud of," the man who believed that feeding and clothing you was already love. My mother looked at me, her voice low. That day, I cried in the kitchen. I was afraid you would quit school over the money. Your father did not say a word. He grabbed his keys, went out for 3 hours, then came back and placed the wallet on the table. The world in my head paused. For years, I believed I grew up alone in coldness and neglect. But it turns out, even in that darkness, someone had quietly stepped outside to retrieve a piece of hope I had lost. I looked at my mother. She was not crying, just bowing her head, her lips trembling. For the first time, I did not see her as weak, only tired. Tired from carrying too many unspoken things. And for the first time, I saw my father, the man I thought only knew silence and severity, as someone who had protected me in a way no one expected. No one said anything else, but I knew some truths do not need to be explained. They do not need justification. They live on in the listener like a gentle stream flowing through the heart, quiet and lasting. I turned away, not wanting my mother to see my red eyes, but this time, my tears were not from bitterness. They were from relief. Relief so deep I felt as if I had been given the chance to start over with a heart freed from old wounds and misunderstandings. I stood up. The western sky was turning gold. The last rays of sun touched my mother's hair, more silver than I remembered. My aunt stood up too. She said nothing, just placed her hand on my mother's shoulder and gave a soft squeeze. My mother reached up, touched her hand, and nodded. They did not need to speak because between them there was a kind of bond that had survived a lifetime of endurance. I walked toward the gate. My sandals made soft sounds against the dry ground. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of straw. Someone far off was burning the rice fields. The smoke drifted lightly, swirling like memories that had not yet faded. I looked back one last time at the old yard where so many glances, so much laughter, and so much suffocating silence had once lived. No one called me back. No one came to see me off. But it was okay, because I knew. I was no longer the one left out. I no longer needed anyone to validate me, because I, with every fall and every time I stood up, had already proven my worth. And more than that, I now knew that each step I took from here on out would no longer feel empty. Because now I understood I did not grow up alone. I did not succeed alone. I did not survive alone. I carry within me the quiet love of an aunt, a small woman willing to sell her earrings to pay tuition for a nephew the family had forgotten. I carry my mother's clumsy affection, a woman who chose to stand aside, not out of indifference, but because she lacked the strength to stand in the center. And I carry my father's silence, a man who never said I love you, but walked 3 hours just to return a wallet. To the son who never thought he had done anything for him. None of them were perfect, but in their own ways, each of them placed me into the hands of a relentless life, and from there, I walked the rest on my own. And now that I have come far enough, I look back not to find the people I left behind, but to say to myself, this path was never as lonely as you thought, because some people choose to love by standing quietly behind, silently, gently, but as steady as the roots of a tree, the kind you can lean on when you no longer have the strength to go on. I returned to the backyard just as dusk was settling. The breeze was cooler now, no longer carrying the scent of burning straw, but softer, as if the earth itself was exhaling after a long day. The plastic chairs were stacked. The table still had a few sunflower seeds scattered across it, a couple of water stains from forgotten glasses. I walked through that space, no longer feeling like I had wandered into a party where I did not belong. No more eyes watching me with judgment. But also, no one ran up to hug me or pat my shoulder in celebration. Everything was quiet. Uncle Tu was the first to come over. He still wore his old button-up shirt sleeves, rolled high helmet in one hand, the other uncertain halfway between offering a handshake or patting my back. In the end, he scratched his head. This morning, I said too much. Didn't think it would. I smiled softly, cutting him off gently. It's all right, Uncle. He let out a breath of relief. Then hesitated. Really, though, I didn't expect you to be so quiet and still accomplish this much. You're impressive. And then he walked away. Did not wait for a reply. Maybe he was afraid that if he stood there any longer, the apology would slip out, and he was not sure he could handle that. I stood in the yard looking around one last time. My cousin was packing away the trays of desserts, avoiding my gaze. But as I walked closer, she looked up. No smile, no excuses. Just one question. Do you resent me? I looked at her. Once so confident, walking into any room like a little queen, now standing like a girl afraid of punishment. I gently shook my head. I do not need to resent anyone anymore. She nodded, eyes glistening, then quickly bent down, picking up a napkin from the ground. I did not know if it was habit or an attempt to hide her reddening eyes. I turned to my mother. She was standing near the door, fiddling with the edge of her shirt. As I approached, she looked up, not flinching this time. I know, I did not do my part as a mother. I looked at her. She was not young anymore, and perhaps she had never really had the chance to be. I do not expect you to forgive me. I just hope you do not hate me. I gently squeezed my fingers into a fist. That sentence 5 years ago would have made me laugh bitterly, but now it made something in me soften. I never hated you, Mom. I only hated the feeling that you never believed in me. She nodded, pressed her lips tight. I saw her hands trembling. You do not have to say anything more. You have been silent long enough. But today, you stood here, looked me in the eyes, and called me by name like a mother should. That is enough. I did not know if I was saying it for her or for myself, but I knew it was true. Another relative came by someone I could barely remember because it had been so long. He smiled awkwardly. Honestly, back then, no one meant anything bad. We just got used to thinking you would not amount to much. I nodded. I did not need any more explanations, because the truth was, I used to think the same. I used to think I would never escape that shadow of poverty. But I did not to get revenge. but so I could stand in the middle of my own family on an afternoon like this and say, I am okay. I am really okay. Right now, my mind was no longer filled with blame or bitterness. Everything had settled, and in its place was one quiet question. Should I stay? Or should I leave, not leave the party? But this family, or more precisely, step out of the circle where I had always been on the edge. I had once dreamed of being accepted, being heard, being seated at the center as someone who mattered. And today, I had that. But strangely, now that the dream had come true, I was no longer sure I needed it. Because if love only comes after you succeed, then is it really love at all? A voice echoed in my head, my own voice, younger, angrier, lonelier. Why forgive them? So you can walk into a room where the stares still sting, even if they are now sugar-coated. I clenched my fist gently, feeling the joints of my fingers turn cold in the late afternoon breeze. But then another voice, also mine, but deeper, wearier, whispered back, forgiveness is not for them. It is for you. So you no longer have to carry those old stones in your heart. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. In that darkness, I saw my father again, the rough man who never said I love you, but once walked under the scorching sun just to return a wallet. I saw my mother, the woman who used to avoid her son's gaze, yet stood still as he held her hand for the first time in decades. I saw my aunt, the one who chose to love me in the quiet, unwavering way no one else in the family had the courage to do. And then I saw myself, that little boy who once stood outside the window watching the family dinner table. He did not cry, but his eyes were full, and I wanted to hold him like an older brother finally showing up. I opened my eyes. The sky was fading. A motorbike roared in the distance. Children laughed from a nearby yard. Life moved on, unaware that today, someone had finally laid down a sorrow they had carried for half a lifetime. I did not have a clear answer to the question, what is forgiveness? I only knew that if I left now, it would not be out of anger, but understanding. Because not everyone needs to stay in order to keep peace. Sometimes leaving is the only way to preserve the peace within. But then, my mother came outside. She did not say a word. She just placed a small cloth bag beside me. Inside was an old handkerchief and a box of food, homemade, by her. Do you still want to eat dinner here? I looked up at her, and suddenly I laughed. Because I understood that was the only way she knew how to say, if you stay, I will try to love you with everything I have left. I did not reply. I just opened the lunchbox. I picked up my chopsticks, and for the first time in decades, I had a meal at home that did not taste bitter. I thought about all the years I had lived chasing validation. Every dollar I earned, every line on a business report, every silent milestone, they were all attempts to prove that I was no longer the child pushed to the edge. But as that dinner began, as my mother placed a bowl of soup in front of me without saying a word, I suddenly understood some victories do not need applause. Some love comes without conditions. I set my chopsticks down, gently. Mom, I said softly, like testing a word I had not spoken aloud in years. She looked at me, eyes unblinking. When I left, did it make you sad? The question came out like a breeze, but inside me it was a stone that had weighed on my chest for years. She pressed her lips together for a long time, then answered, of course it did, but I thought you needed to go, because if you stayed, you would slowly die inside. I froze. That was not the answer I expected, but it was the one I needed most. The truth is, I used to think I ran away from home. But really, my mother let me go, not because she did not need me, but because she did not have the strength to hold on. I sat in silence for a while, then said, "I used to be angry with you. A lot. But now that I think about it, I hurt you too." She looked up, surprised. I thought I was the victim, but the truth is, I also said things that hurt you for weeks. I acted cold, ignored you when you packed food for me, hung up mid-call because I thought you did not deserve to know about my life. I did not cry, but my throat tightened as if an invisible thread was pulling it closed. I forgot. You are just a regular woman, one who also gets tired, hurts, makes mistakes. She looked at me for a long time, then nodded softly, tears welling up, and I forgot that you never had to become anyone special. You just had to be yourself. That would have been enough. I breathed in deeply. It felt like a space inside me had opened up, letting in a light I had long believed was not mine to have. We sat there for a long time. No more words, none needed. I was beginning to understand forgiveness is not about being kind to others. It is an act of mercy toward yourself, so you do not have to keep bleeding from old wounds. I looked around the garden where a guava tree I planted in elementary school once stood, now reduced to a stump. A place once called Dirty Pora House, labeled as one that does not know how to raise a child, was now the place I chose to sit and eat a real meal for the first time in almost 20 years. I used to think forgiveness was to make others feel lighter, but today, as I let go of old memories, I realized the person who felt lighter was me. I sat beside my mother, across from my aunt, next to my cousin who once could not even remember my name. The air was not fully warm, but it was no longer cold, just enough like a light jacket on the first night of a changing season. I no longer felt judged. I no longer felt like I had to prove anything. I sat at the main table. No one invited me. No one stopped me. And for the first time, I understood to step out of the dark, no one needs to turn on the light for you. You just have to stop looking down. After dinner, I stepped outside alone. The sky was now fully dark. The smell of damp earth grass and the June wind blew gently, reminding me of many things, the times I sat on the classroom floor because there were not enough chairs, the lonely meals of instant noodles and fish sauce, the rainy days spent handing out flyers, my clothes soaked and lips turning blue. I used to think that was the price of being alone, but now I knew it was the path of someone quietly walking away from their family's denial, only to return one day and realize they no longer needed anyone's permission to exist. My mother came out slowly holding a light jacket. She did not say anything, just draped it over my shoulders from behind. That gesture, one I never thought I would experience, had arrived. Late, but right on time. "Are you leaving early tomorrow?" she asked. I did not turn around. I just looked into the distance where a neighbor's light had just flicked on. Probably. I still have a few things to finish. She nodded gently. I could feel it behind me like a silent approval, no longer weighed down by regret. I thought about all the people who had hurt me and how, in their own strange ways, they also helped me grow. No one is perfect. No one is always right. But in the end, everyone is just trying to love others the best way they know how. I used to think forgiveness was a destination, but today I realized forgiveness is a journey. It is waking up every day and choosing not to let the past shape your future. I looked back at the house. It did not feel small anymore, and I no longer felt bigger than it. I just felt this was the place I was born, the place that once suffocated me, but now also the place where for the first time I learned to exhale, without anger, in my heart. The next morning I left before the sun was fully up. My mother walked me to the gate. My aunt stood on the porch. No one said much. Just my mother's hug, short trembling, and a very quiet sentence. Next time. Do not wait so long to come back. I nodded. I did not promise, but I knew the next time I return, I will come back differently, not to prove anything, not to demand anything, just to sit at the table, eat a meal, and speak like someone who has finally grown up. The car drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw my mother still standing there, smaller but not fading. I looked straight ahead. The road was still empty, the sunlight still soft, but my heart felt light. Because in the end, I did not have to choose between forgiveness and walking away. I just needed to know this: I am no longer the child left out of dinner, and I do not need anyone to save me a seat. Because I stood up for myself, and I have come so far. I used to believe that some wounds could only be healed by a dazzling victory, that I had to get rich fast, achieve something massive, and one day return, with my head held high, forcing those who once looked down on me to look up. But then I realized some wounds do not need revenge. It is enough to stop living as if you are still running from them. Sometimes success is not about proving anything to anyone. It is simply about reaching a place where you can forgive those who once hurt you, and forgive yourself for having held on to that anger for far too long. I once believed the most important part of a family gathering was to be acknowledged, to hear my name said aloud, to be praised in front of everyone. But in truth, the most precious thing is a silent gaze that has always followed you from afar. Someone who still believed you had value even when no one else did. A pair of arms that might not be wide but opened at the right moment. A chair that was never placed at the center of the table but always left empty, just in case. Maybe they will come back. If you are feeling like the one left out in your family, the one no one asks about during meals, the one who is always seen as less as different, please believe this. The silence you are enduring today might just be the foundation for a brighter version of yourself tomorrow. Do not rush to respond to them with words, and do not force yourself to forgive too quickly. Instead, focus on living well. Build a life that is decent, kind, and resilient, and one day your maturity will speak for you, louder than anything else ever could. And if today you feel alone, know that you are not. On this path, there are so many of us also learning how to rise from family wounds, just like I did. If this story has touched you, please leave a comment so I know you are here, that you stayed until the very end. And if you would like to walk alongside more healing, heartfelt, and honest stories like this one, please subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notifications so you will not miss any journey to come. Thank you for staying until the very end. Because sometimes the most meaningful thing is not who believed in us first, but who stayed until we were strong enough to return.